everybody. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Tonight is the second in my Summertime Sippin' Live series, and we're going to talk about guided reading step by step and what does each part of the guided reading lesson look like. The whole reason I'm doing this entire series, which will take most of the month of July, is to celebrate the kickoff of my brand new series that I've been writing that is called Mastering Guided Reading, and that is specifically for second grade. This is volume 1, and you can tell there's a lot to it, and it has differentiated lesson plans all ready to go for the readers in your second grade classroom. So what I'm going to talk about in today's is each part of the lesson that I use in all my guided reading lesson plans, but it's also, I went ahead and had everything bound so that if I were teaching it, I could literally use it like a manual. And this is what the lesson plans, and I'm going to try to get it all close for you guys right here, the lesson plans from the series look like. And it is all ready to go. And we'll go over some of the pieces of that for you. If you are here tonight, I'd love to know what grade you teach and where you are from. If you'll just mention it in the comments. Tonight, I will be giving away a Literature Circles for Little Learners pack on my TPT store that I wrote at the end of this past school year, and it's all about using literature circles for your primary kids. And it may sound like an odd thing to add in a step-by-step guided reading video because it doesn't quite match up, and it's like, that doesn't quite work. The reason I'm giving one of those away is because I mentioned it on my video from Monday night, and there was some interest and people were interested in that pack, so I thought I'd go ahead and give it away in today's video. So how do you enter? Super simple, just leave a comment below. It could be a question about guided reading. I would love to know your questions. It could be a hello, it could be where you're from. Just a comment is all you need to do to enter the contest. And at the end of this video, after I click out and go upstairs, I will randomly choose one comment and announce the winner right there at the bottom of the thread. So what I want to talk about today is if this is something that is an issue for you, guided reading is a struggle, I want to talk about the broad overview of what a guided reading lesson plan looks like. Now, my last video that I did on Monday was all about what is guided reading, what is it not, and versus other kinds of small group instruction. So today I really want to zero in on that guided reading lesson plan and talk about each part and each piece of the lesson that you'll be doing with your students. Now, I have not taught first grade. I've taught second grade, third grade, and fourth grade. I feel pretty comfortable that this lesson would work, this lesson plan or format would work with second grade, third grade, and fourth grade readers. And I also feel pretty confident and be fine for fifth grade readers as well. Although I have never taught fifth grade, I have taught students that were reading on a fifth grade level. So I feel reasonably confident that this format would work for you. It is kind of a big conglomeration that I've came up with over the years from experience working with different grade levels, reading Jan Richardson's book, and it's taking all these ideas when I did my master's in reading and making one big blob and coming up with how I wanted to do small group instruction. So this is my guided reading lesson plan. So if you would like to get some handouts from this, if you look in the comment section above, I have a handout. It says click here for the handouts from this or something to that effect lesson. So if you would like to get these handouts and keep them maybe in your guided reading binder, you're more than welcome to do that, but they're in the link above, and you will also see the links to my Mastering Guided Reading program that I've also written, so you'll be able to get the links to that as well. So let's go ahead and dive in and talk about each part of the guided reading lesson. This is the first handout that you will see and you're going to see me looking all over because I'm multitasking right now, and I'm so bad at multitasking, but I'm trying real hard. But this is the first sheet in the handout, and it's like a broad overview of what is seen in guided reading. This is for a 30-minute group maximum. 30 minutes is very long. Your guided reading should I would say typically last 20 to 25 minutes in an ideal setting. Part of the reason is simply attention span of your students is that they won't be able to attend for it, the lesson longer than 20 to 25 minutes. And then you also have to think about what are these other kids doing while you're meeting with these small groups. These other kids are having to work independently for 20 to 25 minutes at a clip, and you need to make sure that they're able to do that any longer than that. And most kids can't typically sustain that kind of attention span. So I've broken it down, and every lesson is going to begin with a reread, and we are going to go through break down specifically what each part of this looks like. But you're going to do a reread, you're going to introduce and then activate the text. Activation is optional, and I'll go into that in a little bit. You're going to discuss the tricky words that you've picked out for your readers. You're going to set the purpose for your students to read and explain what they're looking for. They're going to read the designated pages you have assigned and look for the question that you have assigned them to find. Then the students are going to read. The teacher is then going to tap into students and listen to 2 to 3 students read in one session. At the end of the reading time, when the teacher is finished tapping in, and most of the kids are finished with, well, all the kids are hopefully finished with the reading, but maybe they're not quite finished with the writing, and we'll go into that in a little bit. You're going to discuss that set the purpose question. That is time to go into deeper discussion and comprehension and understanding of the text. Then you're going to use that last final bit of it. If you have time, I strongly encourage you to use that time to find a teaching point. Your teaching point is a common error you saw your students make, and I want you to be thinking about, is it a comprehension, is it an accuracy, a fluency, or maybe a vocabulary issue? Those are all things that are great things that you can come up with your teaching plan. In traditional guided reading, that teaching point is not something that you plan in advance. It is something that you don't do on the fly. It is something that you come up with based on what you notice your students doing. However, I have found that many teachers struggle with this because they may not have the experience with reading or that grade level or that level of reader, or they simply may not be very confident in their reading instruction. So one of the things that when I did my mastering guided reading lesson plans is I made sure that for every lesson it follows the same format, and at the very bottom it has the teaching point already set for you, and it's things that I anticipated that students needed at that age level. And so for second grade, it's things that I knew that kids needed. It does follow standards and a standard based, and it is pretty much scripted for you. So it's ready to go. So let's break it down and talk about each part of this idea of the lesson plan. And if you find that this is something that maybe your colleagues might enjoy or something that you're learning from, if you would go ahead and hit that share button and let your friends know and other colleagues and teachers know that this is something they may be interested, I'd really appreciate it. So maybe we can share and all get to know each other a little bit better and also learn from each other. That would be fantastic. And also go ahead and take the time. If you have a question with something I say, go ahead and jot it in that comments. Not only will it enter you into the contest for the Literature Circles for Little Learners, but it can also give me an idea of what you as an audience are looking for in information that I can either discuss tonight and answer tonight or in future Facebook Lives. So let's talk about that warm-up. One of the things that I discussed is that kids should be rereading for fluency practice. And in my classroom, and if this is something that you'd like to see, I can also do another Facebook Live about like the setup, the prep, and the management, if that's something that you're interested in. Kids had a 2-pocket folder with the prongs in the middle, and we kept paper in the middle, and in the very back pocket they put past reads that they'd already read, and we put that in the back pocket, and in the front pocket they had the current book we were working on in guided reading. So my kids could I would usually direct them, do I want you to read a current read, do I want you to read a past read, that kind of thing. And then I had this can, and this can is so pitiful and sad, and it's old. They've had them for 100 years. I remade these prompt sticks, and if you look in the link above, I have a link to the guide to guided reading, and it is all about how I did guided reading, all the materials, the lesson plan format I used, photographs of how I organized in my classroom, but it also has printable copies of these prompt cards that you can make that are way cuter than these right here, if you're looking for that, and that is in my TPT store. But I would just hold out the can, and I'd have one student draw a card, and this would say, for example, did you make a connection to the text, and which one? And they'd have to explain it. So first, they draw the card, they knew what they were reading for, they were reading for a text connection, they'd use that time to read to themselves. And the reason that you are doing this is because this is an easy way to get kids used to reading, get them in the habit of reading the text more than one time. It is for fluency, so that they're reading more smoothly. You can also use the time to tap in and listen to kids read if you want to list like someone is struggling specifically in fluency. And it also, and sometimes, and the real reality of it is that sometimes, like maybe my kids had a hard time shifting between guided reading groups and transitioning, and I needed a minute to get myself together before I hopped into my instruction. So I use that reread time sometimes to get myself settled. So I might tap in, sometimes I might get settled. It was real life. But it's important that kids are doing it to warm up their brains, and it's also a great way to embed fluency without any extra hassle. And then after kids read for 2 minutes or so, you're going to stop them and you're going to say, who wants to share a connection? You're going to ask a kid or 1 to 2 kids to share their connection, and boom, you are done. It should not take a long part of the lesson. It should be 3 to 4 minutes total, and that is maximum. Now, after that, it is time to actually dive into the text, and it is kind of 2 ways to do this, and you'll see at how I organize this is you'll see this is a column, because what I did in this step depended on if it was a new text or if it was a familiar text to kids. So what I mean by a new text is that we were starting a new book. What I mean by a familiar text is if we had started it maybe yesterday and we were continuing reading the book today. So if it was a new text, I would use that time to do some kind of introduction. There are many different ways to introduce the text. For example, this is a lesson plan that I did for a book called Pat the Pirate that I wrote. And for this, I have 2 kinds of introductions. I did something called an activation. And in the activation for the text, they did a prediction passage. And let me show you what that is. This is a style of activation that is optional, and it's not something that you have to do. But I really found over the years, I was influenced by Max Thompson and his learning focused schools in the beginning of my teaching journey. And I found that when you gave kids a heavy preview of the text and scaffolding in the very beginning, they could be very successful in a text that might technically be more difficult for them. So you could push them further along. If they started out lower, it was easier to push them to become more advanced readers. That was just my experience with it, is that with that heavy scaffolding in the beginning, they could actually read a more difficult text. So this is one way to do that with a fiction text. It is called a prediction passage. And in that, you are giving kids a handout that looks like this, and they are basically writing a summary of the text before they ever read it, based on words that the author, or not the author, I'm the author, so I did it by habit, but based on words the teacher has chosen about the text. For example, you're going to choose a variety, and they're going to basically fill in the blanks. So this is about a pirate who is very proud of himself because his captain has given him the very important job of washing the deck. He takes his time because he's very proud of his job, and he turns around and realizes some bird is making a hot mess with some berries, and his feathers are everywhere, and then he has to scare the bird off and start cleaning again. So the words that I chose for the text were job, pat, pirate, scrub the deck, day, ship, captain, yell, birds, spots, mess, clean, scare, club, and mop. So the kids are going to take this list, and then they're going to fill in this prediction passage, and it says the story takes place blank. The main character of the story is blank, who blank. The problem in the story is when blank, and the problem is solved blank. So they're basically making a prediction of what the text is. That is just one sample of activation. I have several different ones for fiction versus nonfiction. If you were interested in trying some of these activities and you just want some ideas, they're in the Guide to Guided Reading. If you want it all made for you so they're ready to go with the matching text, there's one for each of the Mastering Guided Reading texts that I have included. So you can choose to do something like that, and that is an activation to support your readers. And then at the end of the text, we go back and see who had the closest prediction after we've finished the whole book. So that is one way to activate it. After I do that, then I simply do a quick 1-sentence introduction about the text. For example, for the Pat the Pirate book, I say, this is a story about a pirate who has a very important job. Boom. So it depends on how long you want to take for that activation. I tend to do activations when kids are like entering a new level. So we've just moved up and the text level is more difficult now. And I am much more likely to do it in nonfiction because kids need a lot of background for nonfiction text. Oops, did I already go ahead? I did. I'm sorry. So that, I was all out of it. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to skip way ahead. I don't know what I did. Oh, I bet when I put my books down, it skipped ahead. I'm sorry. Now, that is what I do for a new text. So it's a brand new text. If I'm continuing a text, for example, in the books that I wrote, they're going to read a page a day. So you're going to read this one day, this another day, and you're going to do this for the 3rd day. So if it's, for example, the 2nd day, all I would do is simply say, yesterday we read about a pirate who had a really important job. Can anybody remind me of what that job was? They might say his captain told him he had to mop. And then since they have already read the text, it's almost a seamless time to say, okay, today we're going to read page 2, and you're going to move into the next step, which is set the purpose. or I'm sorry, not set the purpose, which is tricky words. So tricky words are words that you have anticipated that your readers will have trouble with. So if you know your kids, you know what they're going to have trouble with. So it's a great time to predict. I like to say you should probably have 2 to 3, no more than that. I'm going to do an entire Facebook Live dedicated to simply introducing the text and also going over tricky words and ways to do that. So I'm not going to get too involved in that tonight. This is a great chance for you to go over vocabulary that may be something you might find the kids will struggle with, in a way to introduce and kind of embed using context clues and support that before you ever actually even maybe introduce the term context clues, but it's a way to sneak it in early. And it is also a way to talk about decoding skills and chunking words up and looking for familiar chunks and looking for prefixes and looking for suffixes and breaking in by syllable. All those kind of things are decoding strategies that you could really model at this time when you're talking about tricky words. Then after you do the tricky words, then it is time for set the purpose. Sorry, I jumped ahead. And the set the purpose question is literally that. It is a question for students to be looking for the answer for when they read. So for example, in Pat the Pirate, the kids are going to be reading. And on the first day, you're going to say, why does Pat feel very important? Read page 1. So the kids will read page 1. And you're going to give each student some kind of like flag. On these, they can actually write on the text because they're consumable. If you were using like the books that are published by companies, for example, Pearson Books, or trying to think of, I can't even think of it off the top of my head, but a publisher that has published a leveled book, you can give them a post-it little flag. And with that flag, they can actually flag where they find the answer in the text. And this is important for 2 reasons. Because 1, you don't want them to stop in the middle of their reading and interrupt that flow and that comprehension of the text to write an answer. And kids will do that. Number 2, it supports like scaffolds the beginning idea of finding evidence in the text. So when it says, what was Pat's job and why did he feel important, they can go back and say, well, here it said his job is blank, and I think it says he feels important because it says la la la. And they've tabbed it in the text without interrupting the flow of their reading. So it's kind of scaffolding and starting the idea of using evidence to support your thinking without really being too heavy and pushing and using big words and overwhelming your kids. When you're giving them that question, it should be fast, it should be quick, no more than 1 minute. Now, after you do the set the purpose time, now it is time for kids to actually read. Now, I'm a pretty big believer in, and I have read that reading aloud is a developmental stage. It is usually ended at around end of 1st grade, but I kind of let it have gone longer in my classroom. In my mid-2nd grade, I really encourage kids to read in their heads. I know people use those whisper phones, and that is a great way to scaffold when kids are still reading orally, to kind of get them to the point where they could keep it in their brains. If they're not quite there yet in the beginning of the year, give them a whisper phone, but it's not something they should have all year long. It is something that you're scaffolding the kids out of. The kids are going to read that portion of the text. While they're reading that portion of the text, because they're using their little sticky note to mark where they have found the answer to the set the purpose question. And after they're finished, they're going to write the answer. And in the Mastering Guided Reading, what I have done is I have made bookmarks with a set the purpose question. So this is for 3 students, and you can slice it right here. They create bookmarks and they write their answer to the question. If you're not using the series, you can use a whiteboard, you can use notebook paper, but they're using that time to write the answer to the question. Now, what do they do when they finish reading? Let's just say they finished reading, but the other kids in the group have not. What do? They reread. And honestly, I never had problems with kids really complaining about it, because it was such a part of our routine, is that if you finish, read it again. And we talked about the reason you're reading it again is because it is making you a more fluent and a more smooth reader. That is what you need to be working on. So it's a great time to do it. Go ahead and just reread while you have a chance. Now, while the kids were doing their reading, I would be using that time to tap in. And I would tap in and listen to one student read. I take a quick running record on my recording sheet that I kept. It is in the Guide to Guided Reading. If you want to see an example of the anecdotal records that I kept for guided reading, I took about 100-word running record, give or take a really short one in their clip. I asked them a comprehension question so I could check to make sure they understood their reading. Then I gave them a glow and a grow. You did a really great job on this. I really want you next time to work on stopping at your periods and pausing at your commas. And notice you blew right past him. If I were a police officer, I'd give you a speeding ticket, because boy, you sure did read fast. Something to that effect. But you did a really, really great job at making your voice sound like the character Pat was talking. Now, let's just say you have 4 kids in your group, and 3 of the 4 kids have already finished writing their answer, and 1 is still lagging behind and still writing, and the rest are now rereading. I do not hold up and stop for the 1 kid to finish their writing. Because right now, the focus of the lesson in guided reading, and this is my opinion, but it is not for the writing portion. There is a guided writing portion in my mastering guided reading, and it is a whole separate day. But right now, I'm teaching kids to be better readers, not better writers. So if someone's not finished writing, I say, don't worry about it. Let's go ahead and just talk about it. And because they've marked the text, they're able still to talk about the answer. So I don't stop everything and hold up for that 1 kid who's still writing. However, every kid must finish the actual reading before we discuss. Then after everybody is finished, I've done my tap in. Now I go ahead, and the way that I kind of look at it is that I know a lot of teachers, what if they're reading silently? Then how do you know who's really reading and who's faking it? Well, it's really simple and easy. If you read with 2 kids and you got 3 kids or 5 kids in your group, then the questions that the kids that you target questions to see if they're understanding the text are the kids that you didn't read with. You just go ahead and make sure that these are the kids that answer comprehension questions today. And so you really you talk about the set the purpose question. Usually I talk about more than 1 comprehension question, and we discuss the text much deeper than just that set the purpose question. We usually I'll follow it up with several more questions, not just the one. So we use that time to discuss the text. And for example, in the Pat the Pirate, because I've used that a million times, let's go ahead and pull up that lesson plan. Let's talk about, I think I'm going in the wrong direction. Let's talk about maybe some of the discussion questions that I would say. What's the setting of the story? Point to the words in this text that make you think this. Well, they could say it takes place on the ocean because it mentions the ocean waves and how it must be daytime because it's a perfect day. And then you can go and draw attention to the picture to help them realize it's also daytime because there's a sun in the picture. You talk about how does Pat feel about playing and what in the text makes you think that. And then what do you predict that a pirate could do for his work? So you're just really elongating and talking about what they have read, and then you're stretching it out. And then after that, if you have time, you're going to do that teaching point. And that is a common error that you saw many of your kids in your group making, and it is a great time to explicitly teach something. A lot of times you could teach something in the area of, I always keep in my mind Cafe by the sisters that wrote the Daily Five, and they also wrote a book called, I think it's Cafe, but it's longer than that. I don't remember all the words. But it's comprehension, accuracy, fluency, and vocabulary, and they call it expanding vocabulary for the Cafe menu, for the E. And I try to always think of something right then and there that I could teach to make these kids a better reader. And for example, I know a lot of people struggle with that because it's hard to come up with something like that just based on what you've seen immediately. So for this one, I did story elements, and so I wanted to teach the different story elements. So it's scripted to say, we have learned about the story elements. We can organize the events by telling them in the order they happened in the text. Ordering the events in the correct order is called sequencing, and when we sequence the events in a retelling, we use temporal words such as these, and there's temporal word cards to show like first, next, then. So what words should we use if we're retelling the story? What words should we start with? And they can pick the cards and apply that skill of sequencing by saying, oh, I think we probably start with in the beginning, or the card that says first, because you start with what happens first in the story. And you can go on so on by there, and that is scripted for you. So that is my guided reading at a glance, step by step. So go ahead, and if you have any questions, make sure that you have mentioned them below in the comments. I'm about to refresh my feed, and I'm going to try to check for any questions that you want to know about guided reading. I may not answer them tonight. I may answer them in a future Facebook Live, or I may, if I'm not able to, like I don't see it, it doesn't come up because it doesn't always list it in real time. I may come back and answer after this video after this video is on replay, that you can go back and watch it, and I can go back and add answers to the comments. So if you have any questions, make sure you type them below. If you think this is something a friend would enjoy, make sure you hit that share button so that you can talk about it and discuss it. And make sure you also get those handouts that have the step-by-step above. So I am going to do my best to answer some of these questions. When you start working on the volumes for the older grades, will there be one-page printouts like Pat the Pirate. I'm not sure, honestly. I haven't even started thinking about the older grades. I'm going to be honest with you, Allison. I am still firmly in 2nd grade. And so if I do 3rd grade, I'm not sure what it would look like, because one of the reasons this took me so long to put out is because I thought very carefully about how I would format it. And that took a long time to plan in advance. I have not thought about upper grades such as 3rd or 4th and how I would format that. So I don't have an answer for that yet. But I will think about it after I finish this one. After I finish the 2nd grade volume, I will think about it. Can you purchase the guide that you held up? And I'm assuming this is from Lori Aiken Embry. This right here is the guide that I'm assuming that you held up. Yes, this is for purchase. This is the Mastering Guided Reading. There are 2 versions of it. It's in the comments above. It is one with word study centers, and there's one without word study centers. And this has 5 fiction books in it and 5 nonfiction books that have 4 levels of each of those books, and there is 1 lesson plan for each book. So hypothetically, you could teach 1 lesson plan, so everybody's working on Pat the Pirate and everybody's working on sequencing, but they're reading on it and their level. The levels of the book are end 1st, beginning 2nd, mid 2nd, end 2nd. So hopefully it will hit a huge range of your kids. So this is available to go with it. I also, at the beginning of every lesson, starts with a word study pattern that is found within that text, and I can't remember off the top of my head. Pat the Pirate works on, I don't remember what their word study is. I'd have to, oh wait, this is page 2. It has, oh, it's U, short U sounds. And it has word sorts for each of the books, and then the words from many of the sorts are found in the text, so kids can do a search of the text to find examples of those words from the word study patterns. So the more expensive pack with the word study centers has an additional completely added pack where if you do like the daily 5 and you want to do word study, it has like 4 or 5 different centers that are specifically about each pattern. And I think I need to just do an entire video just about the word study because it is so much to include with the guided reading. Do you move directly into the nonfiction paired reader after reading the fiction story? Is it required? This Deldrika. Good question. That is up to you, and it's up to you with your kids' needs. I personally, if I were using this in my classroom, I would not do that. I would not do fiction, nonfiction, fiction, nonfiction, and pair it that way. I wrote it because some teachers are simply required. The way that I would do it is by whatever the unit I am doing in my whole group mini lesson matches. So for example, the whole group mini lessons that I do in the beginning of the year are going to be focusing on story elements, sequencing, beginning, middle, and end. And they're going to be whole group mini lessons before we move into the guided reading group. And so when I wrote Mastering Guided Reading, it's not a perfect matchup, but it's pretty dang close. And it has all the fiction books are story elements, sequencing, problem solution, and answering questions so that you're able to work on those things in your small group as well as whole group. And I wrote a set of mini lessons that basically cover everything I just added called the Developing Readers. It is in my TPT store and it is unit 1, and it is something that I'm hoping to continue. I'm in the middle of writing volume 2 right now, and it is your whole group lessons, and it will pair, and I'm working on a correlation guide so that whenever you're doing your whole group lesson, you can reinforce it in your small group with these Mastering Guided Reading. And I'm not quite ready to share that yet because I'm still working on the volume 2 of the guided reading books and volume 2 of the developing readers, but that is something that is in the works. So whatever you're doing whole group, then you could support and scaffold in small group. So I would not do flip-flop because usually I do not introduce nonfiction text until about late September, mid-September is usually when I introduced it, when I felt my kids had a firm grasp on the basics of fiction text. Then I moved into nonfiction text because I found that nonfiction was more difficult for kids to read for that reason. How long should volume 1 last? Okay, this is completely up to you and how you choose to use it with you and your kids. So I can't say, if you were to use every title and every day of instruction, it is 40 days of instruction. And that is how I priced it because it's basically $1 a day. A little more than $1 a day is how I came up with the pricing. if you are able to use it that way. If you have the resources to level your kids and you have a DRA kit or you have a Rigby assessment kit or you have some kind of assessment kit where you can get that instructional level, instead of just saying, okay, we're going to move our way through the books, you could also use this chart and say, okay, I have a group that's on a G, a group that's on an H, and a group that's on an like L, and you can pull from the text to match the readers. So not everybody would be reading the same text because kids will be reading the level that they need. So it is up to you and how you choose to use it. So it could go as long as 40 days of instruction. However, it could be less depending on how you chose to use it. I hope that makes sense. And if it doesn't, ask again or ask it, let me know and I'll try to clarify it because it's kind of confusing. How many units will there be of the Mastering Guided Reading? There will be 6 volumes. Each volume is a different size and a different length because it depends on how many books are in it. The way I group the books were by phonics patterns. So for example, in this first set, it is short vowels and a couple digraphs. I can't remember. I've got it all planned out. It will be, I think it's 26 fiction and 26 nonfiction books is what it'll end up being spread over 6 volumes. But I think that's right, will be the end result. And I do have that planned. However, I don't have planned exactly what the sequence of the comprehension skills will be to match each book yet. That is something I am still working on. So one volume is like 10 books, another's 10 books, one is 6 books, one will be 14 books, and another is like 10 books. So that should give you an idea of how long these will be. Let's see. You love that the text is one folded page. Yes, Kim, the reason I did this was on purpose because I wanted to make sure that teachers were able to not use all their copy counts on copies for the book because they are consumable. So you can print it one page front and back. You don't have to worry about over blowing out that copy code if your copies and paper are counted. And you can also have kids actually write in the text. And if you're working on tricky words, they can actually circle things or underline where they find their set the purpose question. And also after you finish reading, you can send it home and not worry if it has to come back. So let's see. That is, hey, Amy. Amy and I used to work together. I love Amy. She's wonderful. You're amazing too, Amy. That looks like all the questions I have for now, but I can't tell because I can't tell what's in real live. So if I missed your question, I'll try to come back and answer it. Make sure that you have commented below for your chance to earn the Literature Circles for Little Learners, and I'll randomly select a winner and announce it on the bottom of this thread and just a little bit in the bottom of this video. And remember that this is just the second in this series on guided reading. So the first one was what is guided reading and what is it not. This tonight was all about what are the pieces of a guided reading lesson. And tomorrow, or not tomorrow, I'm going to do Monday. Mondays are going to be the days. Mondays and Wednesdays are the days that I'll be doing Facebook Live. And you'll see the schedule here, and it shows that on Monday we're going to go through a lot of the parts of the guided reading lesson, and we're going to talk about specifically introducing the text and tricky words, because I have a couple different ways to introduce tricky words to help your students decode them and apply it to their own reading later. So thank you so much for joining me. If you think this is something a friend will enjoy, make sure you share it. Make sure you put a comment in the bottom so you're entered for that Literature Circles for Little Learners pack. And if you have any questions, I hope I can help you, and just leave it below. I hope you have a wonderful night, and I hope I see you back here again at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Monday. Thank you so much.